everyone, and welcome to the Tulsa World Opinion Podcast. I am here today with Representative John Waldron of House District 77, and you're not opposed you're running unopposed this year, correct?
Yes. Yeah, and no one filed against me, which meant that I didn't have to run for re-election. Instead, you'll see me in the neighborhoods knocking doors on behalf of other great candidates that I like.
So usually I complain about how we don't have choices, but at the same time, there's an argument to be made about when no one files, then they seem to be happy with the representation. So maybe you're going to say that everyone's happy with the service of John Waldron. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Voters of District 77, I do not take you for granted, and I will be there and available should you ever need anything from me.
When are your office hours? If someone wants to see you, when do you meet?
Well, I'm glad you asked. I sit at the Freeway Cafe on 4th and South Sheridan every Sunday after church from 11:30 to 1 o'clock, and I love when constituents come out to share a cup of coffee with me.
I think that's a brilliant idea because at a minimum, you're going to get breakfast even if no one shows up. So I like that idea. But I'm talking to you today about the Bible mandate that State Superintendent Ryan Walters has been pushing. And I'm writing about it this weekend, and I almost don't want to do it because it's a distraction to a department that's clearly on fire financially. But that's what we're doing. And specifically, he has chosen the King James Version for all the classrooms, 5th through 12th, at a cost of $3 million, which is interesting because it's free online. And so there are sort of three things I thought about, which is the first one is there are better ways to spend $3 million in schools. And I went down a lot of rabbit holes doing some research on what those could be. Also, and this is where you come in as a former history teacher, is I think this whole we're just trying to teach accurate history is a ruse because this doesn't seem to be how history is taught. And then third, and I didn't know this, maybe you did. Did you know King James was gay or bisexual?
Yes, I did.
Okay, yeah. I did not. That was an afternoon of fun reading and something that I probably don't think is part of Ryan Walters' history is to include that the man's Bible who we're pushing may have lived a life he didn't like. So, but I want to start with, and you helped me figure this out, $3 million, how many teachers does that buy?
Oh, I think you could hire 60 teachers for a year at $3 million. That might be enough to reach, if each teacher had 170 students, well, that's what, 10,000 students? No, I'm not a math teacher. That's 1,000 students. So, you can run a high school faculty off of that $3 million.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
I found that it would also get 1.7 million lunches.
Yes. Imagine if we applied that to communities under the CLE program to eliminate lunch debt and lunch shaming.
I'll tell you what did surprise me. Tubas are expensive. They're like 10 grand. You can get like 300 tubas with that. So I had fun coming up with a list. But in all honesty, this whole argument is, well, we're just trying to teach accurate history. We just want, and I just find that to be just a ruse because it's backwards. Like when you learn about, say, Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail, you learn that and then go back to the influences by which that was pulled, correct?
Yes.
You don't start with, we're going to learn the King James Version of the Bible and then find people that it influenced.
Right.
Explain this to me. How is that? How are people misunderstanding what's happening in these history and social science classes?
Well, I think the first thing we have to understand, if we're using the King James Bible, it is beautiful language. It was written 400 years ago. King James, in the reign of King James, we published his Bible and the complete folio of works of William Shakespeare. So now imagine that you're going to be teaching students Shakespeare without context and expect them to understand what it means. You can do it, but at the scale they're talking about, they've chosen a deliberately obscure version of the Bible because they know students won't have a basic understanding of the meaning of the language. Therefore, a teacher can use that language to tell the students what it means. And that is to turn an education on its head. I've always thought that as a teacher, the most important thing you can do is get your students to ask questions, to open up inquiry. But they're choosing a path that shuts down inquiry and is really the very nature of indoctrination that Superintendent Walters always claims is going on in the classroom that he's trying to prevent.
Well, it also kind of also reminds me of like, you have to understand this to understand the other. That's like saying, well, you have to be Catholic to understand Martin Luther, or you have to be Catholic to understand the influence of St. Thomas More. And that's where I kind of think that this
Right.
is backwards. And that's where I think this whole thing is just, it's just a culture war.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I mean, when you think about it, he's already clearly in violation of the separation of church and state. And incidentally, I'm wearing my University of Virginia shirt today, my alma mater, because Thomas Jefferson wrote the Articles of Religious Freedom for the Virginia Constitution, and he established that religion was to be kept separate from the political sphere so that we did not establish a particular religion and impose it on everyone else. And here we are going to impose the King James Bible on every student, regardless of their religion or lack of religion. And that's going to be a standard. We're going to put the imprimatur of the state behind this one edition of the Bible. And we'll talk in a second about the particular edition the superintendent seems to wish to purchase. And what we're doing is we're saying we're backing up a religious message with the power of the state. And I tell you what, that is corrosive to the state and it is corrosive to religion. We will raise a generation of students who trust neither the state nor nor religion because they felt like religious values were forced down their throats by this foolish policy.
and what people I have found don't understand is he's talking about putting this in like fifth grade classes and getting teachers who may not be Christian themselves to use Bible stories to teach math and a lot of people want to jump to AP history, and I have found that that's already being taught. My daughter just took an AP history class by one of your former students of all people, and she learned exactly that. So I don't know where that's coming from, but talk a little bit about this version that he's wanting to put in place.
Okay, well, he's put out an RFP, and he wants it to be the King James version. Other government documents like the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Well, if you look carefully around, there's only one Bible that meets those criteria, and it's endorsed and signed and run and sold at the profit of Donald J. Trump. So if now I've read the Bible, and one of the things the Bible tells me is that idolatry is a sin. And if we're going to lay down money and state support and the imprimatur of legitimacy in the name of a Bible that's authorized and endorsed by Donald J. Trump, we might as well be building an altar to Trump, a golden calf with Trump's face on it. This is idolatry. And what the superintendent is doing seems to me more an act of worship than an act of public policy.
And you do get the Lee Greenwood lyrics in that Bible too, from what I understand. So, but I want to go back to the problems with OSDE right now. And this has been disheartening for me to find out. A lot of people want to talk about the Bible and wokeness and all that. What they don't know are the actual problems going on. And some of them are going to be in the legislature. I've been meeting candidates for the last 90 days, and it's shocking how many don't know of the federal report that looked at $2.7 billion and found most of it to be so poorly mismanaged that the state has 60 days to correct it. Money that meant for maternity leave, federal dollars to everything.
Yeah.
Not everything. I'm sorry. Old word. Inhalers are not getting to local districts. What's happening there? Why are people not hearing that message?
Well, yeah, let's start by specifying that the federal government looked at 50 separate areas for how the state spends its money and found us deficient in 32 of them. The legislature hasn't had time to really drill down on that because we're not in session. We're going to hold a loft committee session later on this month where we intend to look into what Superintendent Walters is doing with the State Department, and I wish them well in their investigation. But as for ordinary citizens, I think you're right. We should be reluctant to talk too much about the Bible question because it seems to me the superintendent knows the loft committee is coming soon. And so he raises a storm over here about Bibles in the classroom. So we'll focus on that and not on the extreme problems with the way our taxpayer dollars are being spent. So I think in any conversation with Superintendent Walters, our first question should be, where's the money, Lebowski? Because it's the largest state appropriated agency. The state puts a lot of money into the State Department every year, and we should. A lot of federal dollars go through the state, and they're not really supervised very closely by the legislature, and that's a problem. And this superintendent has already racked up probably the worst administrative record of any state superintendent in living memory.
One of the things that is going to happen in the next session is you're going to have a lot of new faces. And so I'm curious what the appetite is, because it seems to me most money that comes into his hands, into Ryan Walters' hands, gets mismanaged. I mean, that's starting with the gear funds to these recent reports that are just coming out in the last 90 days. So what is the appetite, you think, for funding something like $3 million for Bibles, or whatever the pet projects are that state superintendents usually seek, whether it's reading curriculum or something? How trusting are lawmakers right now to fund some of these things in the budget that's coming forward?
Well, I think we live in a supermajority state, and the supermajority won't get engaged on this issue until it starts to affect their core interests. Last year, we ran a limitations bill that was designed to keep the superintendent from spending tens of thousands of public dollars on public relations firms that would get him on Fox News. We ran the bill. We barely got it across because there's lots of members in the GOP who didn't think this was a problem. The governor vetoed it, and we failed to override the veto. So that was not an effective deterrent to the superintendent, who is, by the way, now once again contracting with a firm to get himself on Fox News, and we're paying for it. And in the new legislature, I guess it remains to be seen whether there's an appetite for reform. I will tell you that in the primary elections, where relatively few Republican voters turn up, a lot of what we might call moderate Republicans lost their seats and were replaced by Republicans further to the right. So I wonder if this new supermajority is going to have an appetite to rein in Superintendent Walters. But I will say, if they do not, they must be held accountable for failing to hold the superintendent accountable. And that means, voters, you need to make hard choices about whether the people on your ballot are going to protect our interests and our taxpayer dollars and stand up to Ryan Walters.
I always try to get people to put aside all the culture war stuff and say, just focus on the dollars. And if we can get people to do that, I mean, that's, as a taxpayer, we can all agree we need to be able to know where every tax dollar goes. And right now with OSDE, we really don't know. And I think we're going to be finding out pretty soon. So thank you for coming on here. What are some last words you want to leave us with about this issue, or anything else on your mind? I just want to let you have the last say here.
Lo, though I walk through the valley of Walters, I will fear no evil, for the Lord is with me. His rod and his staff will get to the root of what's going on in the State Department and root out his corruption. And we will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Well, that's right out of Shakespeare, right? About the same.
Yeah, that's King James.
There you go.
But King James, half the quotes in the English language come from the reign of King James. So I honor his contribution to English language and our culture, but I also recognize that we live in the 21st century, not the 17th.
And on that, thank you so much. I appreciate your time, and we will speak again at some other moment. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ginny, as always, for covering this important story.